So we've made it to the end. We have already answered questions such as, what if I have to teach is grammar? What if I need to teach vocabulary? And we have dealt with two of the macro skills. We have dealt with reading and with writing. The question we will be addressing now is whether what I have to teach remotely is listening. What do we need to consider if it is listening, what we have to deal with remotely? Well, basically some things are shared with the other macro skills. We need to consider a pre-listening moment. The pre-listening moment is fundamental for the listening task itself. It's about getting students to try to anticipate what is it that they will be listening to. And it's about engaging students in listening to the tone of the voices of the speakers. What is it that they might be talking about, or where the conversation might be taking place. It's really very important that we devote some time to this pre-listening moment, which of course we would normally do in class. But since we don't have that opportunity in these remote tasks, we will have to provide it. So we have the pre-listening moment, and we have the post-listening activities, which of course have to do with getting students to listen for detail. Just as with reading, listening and reading are receptive skills, we need to go from the general idea to the detail. So here we've got some things that we need to discuss and bear in mind. When it comes to pre-listening, it's really very important that we establish a context. What do I mean by that? We cannot simply tell them, you will listen to, or listen to and decide if the statements are true or false. This is like pushing students into uncertainty. We need to establish a context. We need to create a motivation for listening. And how do we do that? How do we actually create a motivation for listening? Well, in the pre-listening moment, we can make students make hypotheses, or make predictions, or make personal connections, anticipations. And normally when you engage students in making predictions, then they want to cross-check those predictions. So this is what we mean by creating a motivation for listening. And something which is crucial is pre-teaching the vocabulary that you know will help them understand better. Only key vocabulary. We cannot pre-teach them 1,000 words. When it comes to extensive listening, we will be posing students with general questions on context or attitude of the speakers. General questions, those questions for a general idea, cannot go to the detail. So basically, these are questions that have to do with where they think that the conversation is taking place, or what is it that what's the relationship between the speakers, where is the conversation taking place, and how do you know? Something that we can also do is work with pictures. Pictures might give students a hint so that they can make these predictions. Intensive listening has to do with preset questions. Intensive listening has to do with answering those questions and then checking the answers to those questions. And we've got some other golden rules over there to take a look at. And they have to do with giving background knowledge. If you feel that what they are going to listen to, they might not know much about, you give them background knowledge. The learners might be reading something before listening. Why not? It's a good idea. You would be integrating two skills, and that's always a very good idea. They might be reading something before they listen. Looking at pictures is one of my favorites. That's how you would be integrating speaking and listening. And definitely engaging students in some kind of discussion regarding the topic. So if the conversation is going to be about sports, for example, you can make students talk about their personal connections to sports. Why not? And a question and answer session always will do in this initial part. As I always say, this is something that you would definitely do with your students in class. Remember that now they are not in class. So this is part of what I call scaffolding. We have to include these pre-listening tasks in those remote tasks that we will be sending students. Moving on to speaking, again, which other things we have to consider, and I left it for the very end because normally what I get from teachers these days is, what am I going to do with speaking? I cannot engage my students in speaking practice remotely. And the truth is that I think we can. We can and we should, because it's a mandatory skill. It's really very important that, again, part of that scaffolding I have been mentioning all throughout the mini videos has to do with the pre-moments, a pre-speaking moment in which, in this case, for speaking, you will have to create a context. It's really very important that you anticipate as a teacher what vocabulary and what structures your students will need to speak. It's really very important that you model before they speak and that you don't plunge them into speaking directly. It's really, really very, very important that we give them all the tools they need to be proficient as they speak. How can you assess that? How can you make sure they practice speaking at home? If you have the possibility, again, technology can help you here. Not for every task, but from time to time, you might ask them to record themselves and send you a video. Sending a video through, through WhatsApp is something quite simple. And if not, you can tell them to practice it, because when they come back to school, you're going to do it in class and you're going to assess them. That is showing them that you are actually sending tasks that you will be assessing and paying attention to. So we are providing them with a context. We are scaffolding by giving them the vocabulary and the structures that they need. And I want to show you an example, a very simple one of the very many we will be exploring together. So for example, this is for a beginner level. Students will have to match the questions to the answers. These are personal questions. So they've got personal questions such as, do you live in a house or a flat? Tell me about your bedroom. What is your telephone number? Where are you from? What is your name? And students have to match the question to the answer. Apart from checking that they understand the essence of the question and the answer, we are exposing them to structures. So immediately afterwards, and using those questions and answers as a model, students will be engaged in answering the questions about themselves. So, do you live in a house or in a flat? Oh, I'm not very sure how to answer that. Let me check what's the answer. I live in a house. Oh, but I don't live in a house. I live in a flat. I live in a flat. So this is the kind of scaffolding I was mentioning before. So it's really very important that we move from exposing them to what we expect them to do later on, so that they feel reassured before speaking. So we are reaching the end of Module 1, and something very important to do, and this is also very important for you to bear in mind for your classes. It's always very important to recap as you are reaching the end. So this is what we are going to do now. That's why you've got a nutshell, in a nutshell. Okay, what is it that we have been talking about during all these mini videos in Module 1? Well, basically, we need to remember that, unfortunately, We haven't had the time to meet our students, and there they are at home, and we are engaged in, we are being asked to be part of a pedagogical contingency plan. And that means that although students are not going to school, they need to keep up this school rhythm somehow. This has never happened before. I really don't think we were ready for this. And as I said before, we teachers are showing that no matter what, we are there to help our students. So we are doing the best we can. And I was making reference to technology. If you've got all the technology at your disposal, there's nothing to talk about. But the truth is that many times you don't have all the technology at your disposal, and your students do not have all the technology at their disposal. So if that happens to be the case, you will probably have to be submitting some tasks, what we call, and will be calling throughout this course, remote tasks. So the first thing we need to remember is that it's not about just giving. We cannot just give them tasks to deal with. Normally, we would have a class at school, we would teach them, we would help them, we would discuss, and then we would give them a task to deal with. But all that previous part I've been mentioning is not happening, so it's really very important that we remember that it's not just giving. We need to scaffold. And scaffolding, I wrote it twice on the screen on purpose. We have to scaffold, first of all, before. What do I mean by scaffolding before? Contextualizing, moving from the known to the unknown. There was a question that I posed today at the very beginning, asking you if it is about teaching new things or starting with recycled items. And I think that it's about moving from the known to the unknown. After all, when we start school, there's always this diagnostic period. So this is part of scaffolding at the very beginning, these remote tasks. It's about contextualizing so that they can notice. And of course, there is scaffolding again throughout the tasks. It's in the before, in the pre, in all these pre moments we've been talking about. It's about scaffolding during tasks. And as you give them feedback on their tasks, you are also scaffolding. You are there. It's not just giving. Because this homework with some elements of self-study guide, which is what we concluded in Module 1, needs to get students have a sense of achievement. If we have frustration, if we have puzzled students, if we get angry students and frustrated parents, none of this can be positive, and this is definitely what we don't want. So remember, one of the things we mentioned all throughout is this importance of getting students to be autonomous learners. And for this autonomy to take place, it's really very important that there is scaffolding all throughout. So, my dear colleagues, until we meet again in Module 2, where we will keep on exploring all these aspects in depth, it's really important that you remember that there is a guide with tasks for you to check your understanding of all the concepts that we have covered in Module 2. There's a guide for you to comply with, and there will be one after each of the modules. So all that is left to say is, again, how happy I am to have all of you on the other side on the screen, how much I would have loved to see you again face to face, but those times will come back, And until we meet again, we are making it happen this way. So bye-bye, everybody, and see you in Module 2. Bye-bye.